Welcome, and I would like to immediately dive into the topic. You probably have a drawer in your kitchen where you keep your forks, your spoons, and your knives, and so handily ready. But your drawer probably doesn't look like this. So it's a real mess, it's untidy, everything is just in there, and you won't find things that you have there. So you more like want something like this. So that's why you have usually spaces in your drawer that where you define how you put in the forks, where you put the knives, and so on. And having a complex AUTOSAR model is kind of a similar challenge. It's because you have a lot of things that are defined. You have to put things there that were not there before. You need to find the correct parameters. You even have references that you need to travel. And you also have to keep in mind different use cases. Probably you want to integrate applications, so you need to define startup parameters, define process parameters for your applications, dependencies between applications. You need to integrate AUTOSAR configuration files that you get from different sources and so on. And in the end, your application should work. So there are a lot of files involved here, files that make up your model. So if you look, you have probably service interfaces, you have your application design, parameter definitions, so a lot of different files that end up in one big model. And you should be aware that your model can get really complex in the process. So you should think of best practices and constraints that you need to handle. You need an efficient tool to work on the model. You need a concept in how you work on the model, because working on different text files without coordination is also not a good thing. You will get the model from different locations. You need to think about how to split up the model. And you will also have generated files probably. So you really need some ways to maintain the overview of your model and maintain your that you have control over the model. And we developed a tool at Electrobit for that to work on the AUTOSAR model. It's called EB Corbo Studio, and I would like to show you how to work efficiently with that. The first thing that I want to note is how you have a top-down view, a really view on the whole model that you have defined in your project. A top-down view on all the little things that go around in the model. And it's called the model editor. I know, not really creative, but it serves a purpose. You should use that editor when you need the overview over the full model of your project. And it will display a tree representation of your model. And what you have to keep in mind, it will show you the full merged model of your project. So all the files that are scattered around your project, you will see in this editor. And this is also what your code generators then see in the end. And you can use the model editor. The editor will show you all elements, even if split up. There is a breadcrumb. You can see it here, and I will show it also shortly in the example. And with the breadcrumb, you can limit your view to a subtree in the editor. So you can set the root of the shown tree in the editor to inspect parts of the editor. And with the model editor, you can also easily see from which defined element is your from which file does the content of the model come. And this is actually really handy to keep the overview, because you will always know from which source is this parameter, this element in my model coming from. You can also change the model in this editor, but I do not really recommend that. So you can You can change it with a right-click menu. You can add also elements to the model, but I do not really recommend that. So let's have a short look at how this will work. And this is EB Corpus Studio. I already prepared a webinar workspace so that I have a demo application ready at hand where I can show you a few things. And I used the adaptive demo and the custom validation demo here. You see it in the Project Explorer. Those are also delivered with Corpus Studio. So you can easily take a look at these projects if you have Corpus Studio and try it out yourself. So first, looking at this adaptive demo, there are 3 files defined. And those 3 files hold the actual AUTOSAR model. And those 3 files are kind of different things of the model within the model. And I will open the right-click menu, and you will see that there is an AUTOSAR adaptive option. And this gives you a lot of actions that you can use on an adaptive AUTOSAR project. So you have some validation options, you can create new plugins, and you can open also the model editor. And this is now interesting. The right-click menu here is context aware, so you will be able to have different options if you right-click on a specific file. So it's context aware, and you will have more options if there are additional actions possible. So I will now open the model editor for the full project. And then you will see the tree of the full model defined in this project. And here is the breadcrumb that I've talked about. So with the breadcrumb, you set the root of the model, as I said. What you can also do is those 3 files consist the full model. And if you look then at the full tree, I will expand now the full tree. You will see a lot of things coming up. This is the full model defined in this adaptive demo. And you can see also that there are a lot of things laying around already. And if you note the small brackets behind some of the items, you can see where the source is defined. So from which file is this part of the model coming from? You can see that in default ARXML, you have defined the adaptive platform diagnostic example. So this package is defined in this file in the Project Explorer. And this gives you the easy possibility to identify your artifacts where your model is defined. So you see the can.autosar file, and always the full subtree is contained within this file if there is no bracket again. So let me shortly pause here. So you see here is default ARXML, and all the children of this are also within this file. So it also always gives you only the bottom, the file if the whole subtree is defined in this file. If you see that it's written can.autosar and one other, then there will be more files defining this part of the model. And if you look then down a little bit, you see here can.autosar and one other, it's can ECU config and can autosar. So those 2 different parts of the models are defined. So I want to now go already to the next topic, so you can see the recording if you get the presentation afterwards and look up the specifics. to see the key takeaways, the model editor gives you an overview over the full AUTOSAR model within your project. And it's used to keep the overview over the project. I would not recommend to use it to add things to the model here. There are better editors for that. But it's really handy to see how the merged model looks in the end. So you will see then how the full model that your code generator sees, that your Corpus Studio project sees. So what if you want to add things to the structure? Then I would recommend to use the tree editor for this. The tree editor shows the AUTOSAR model defined in a specific file. And it's easier to work with the concept of a file in the back of your mind, because you will not have the problem that you add something to the tree and then it ends up in a different file than you anticipated. So I would really recommend to work with the tree editor on a specific file when adding things to your AUTOSAR model. You can also inspect the model of this file. So if you have put it in a smart way, so you split up your model into files with a consistent scheme, then you will have an easy way to inspect parts of the model, because you will have some functional clusters you're working on. And editing the model with this editor is also quite easy. So you have the tree representation, and with a right-click menu, you have some options to, for example, add a new child. And the new child will only show you allowed elements that you can add to this element. So it will also, you will keep a consistent model here. You can even restrict what you can see here as options with the activity filter. So you can, for example, if you want to limit your view to application design, you can set an activity filter for application design, and then you will only have options that make sense in this scope. And this reduces the complexity really by a lot when working with the model, when defining the model. And there is also a new child wizard. The new child wizard is easier to use when you are not sure that you know what child you need to add. So you have a new child type field here where you can put in the name of the element and start typing it, and then you get all the possible options for that. So if you know a little bit around in a model, then you can have an easy time adding elements here, because you have a search function with the editor. So let's also show here a small example. I'm again in the Adaptive AUTOSAR demo, and I will show the corresponding editor. And now I will open the tree editor for default.arxml. So with a right click and the context menu, it's the option Open Corpus Tree Editor. Again, this is not available in the context menu if you, for example, use the root of the project, because you have to keep in mind you are working now on really on a specific file. So let's open the tree editor. And it looks kind of similar. There is no breadcrumb though. So the breadcrumb is not here. And if I expand now everything, I have only the parts that are really defined in this file. And with the model editor, I had also the Khan config that was lingering there in the Khan.AUTOSAR definition and the Khan ECU config. So you have some options to show more data. You can display, for example, the class name and the feature name to access the element. This gives you a lot more information because what is shown by default here is the short name of the element. And the short name should give you some hint if you have a consistent naming scheme, but it's also good to know what class you have in the background here. And here is the new child option. You see here a lot of options. They are also structured in a way so that that you can find it easier if you know your way around. And to add elements, you need to identify the element that you want to add, and then you have to add it to the tree. So I mentioned activity filters. Activity filters are really good to limit your scope to a special, to a scope that you want to work in. So if I limit the scope, for example, to application design, I do not end up with so many new child options here. So I really only have options that make sense in the scope that I selected. And you can even create your own activity filters. It's basically an XML file that is read when you start Corpus Studio. Let's add an element here, and you see the element is created. We can also use the new child wizard to add elements. And you see in the properties view already the newly added element. I will mention the properties view in the next part, how to use it. Now I'm setting the activity filter back to no filter so that I have all options available, and I will add a second element with a new child wizard to the package so that you also see how to use the new child wizard. The new child wizard is easier to use if you, as I said, if you want to search for an element and do not exactly know what to add here. You have to put in the name of the type you want to add into the search box, and it will try to find the corresponding element. So if you start with COM, you end up with a lot of COM options. And you can search for the option that you want to know. So if I want to add a composition software component type, I start with COM. I see a lot of COM options, so maybe it would be a good idea to also set here an activity filter. I can do that also in this new child wizard. Here you see the available activity filters. Let's limit it to application design. And then if I start with COM, I only see the composition software component type and not all the COM options that would be available in principle. So I can select this element, and with finish, I can give it also a short name in this wizard already. Let's give it some short name. It's already pre-filled, but I want to change it. And with the help button, I can also look up some online help from the user guide. It's also available if I need some more info on that. I can also put up the help here, and this is quite handy if I want to look up something without having to go to the user guide all the time. So with finish, you can add the element to the tree. And what also works is that you can drag and drop the elements around. So if I want to put the element somewhere else in the tree, I can move them around, and if the location is allowed, that I can really move it, and I will have an indication if I am not allowed to move it to that space. So it will show me if that is possible or not, and I can drag and drop the elements around also. So here I would also like to stop this part. You can look up the rest later. So as takeaways for this tree editor, it's want to work on a specific part of the AUTOSAR model that is contained in a specific file. One thing to note is that you should choose carefully how to split up your model into files. And you should also use activity filters to make adding new elements easier. So it's really a big help if you work on the model to have activity filters, because it's not so overwhelming when you need to add things to your tree. Then I mentioned the properties view, and the properties view is so you can now add things to the tree, to your model, and move things around. But how do you set properties on your model elements? And this is what the properties view is for. You use it to gain information on the element that is selected in your model and to inspect elements. And you can use it also to set the properties of an element. And that's the intention of this view. So to edit the model, you first select it in the tree. So for example, in the tree editor, and then the properties view gets synchronized. It will stay synchronized if you navigate in the model, either the model editor or the tree editor, also other editors. The format of the property name gives you already an indication of the type of the property. So if it's mandatory and so on. And you have also a tooltip. So if you move your mouse over the short name, you get also information. I will show this in the example shortly. And from the properties view, you can navigate between references. And this is also really, really interesting in how to navigate references, because it makes it much easier to move around within the model instead of having to scan for text files or to search within files. So I want to show this also in a short example. So for that, I am again in my Adaptive project. So let's move a little bit forward. I have opened the model editor for the default ARXML. And here down you can see the view properties. Now I have not selected anything in the tree, so the properties are not synchronized. And when I select the ADAM software component type, then it will get synchronized to the bottom view, to the properties view. And this is really, really handy to have. If I move around in the model, then it gets synchronized to different parts, and the properties view stays synchronized here. So you will see different properties for different elements. So it's aware of which element is selected. I want to see more information on the elements to have an easier way around to see what I'm doing. And let's change the short name of an element to show how it's synchronized to the tree then. Changing the short name, and then it's already synchronized, but it's not saved yet. So the element is changed. You can see it in the tree editor, but it's not saved, and you can see this with the dirty flag before the file name. So to actually have it persistent, you have to save it with Control-S, for example, or with the toolbar button. So now I changed it back to ADAM, and you see the dirty flag, and with Control S I have saved it now. I could also use save in the toolbar. Now, if I move over the property name, I get a tooltip to see the info from the specification. So what the specification says, basically, I get some hint how to edit the property, and this comes in handy when you want to remember, oh, what was that about? I can look it up. I also have different types of parameters that I can set, so different types of attributes. If it's a Boolean, I have, for example, the possibility to set or unset it, and if it has not been set, it's this way with this rectangle in the middle. This means it's not set yet. This means false, and if there is a mark there, then it's true. Beside that, the icon beside that can remove the value so that it's as if it has never been set. And this is a different thing than just setting it to false for a Boolean, for example. So you have to be aware if it should be unset or false. You can also have a list of possible options. So if the service kind, for example, here is a list of options where you have to pick one. This is also already set here, so you can easily select it in a combo box. So now I would like to speed up a little here to navigate to references. Yes. So we have here a reference to the get event counter interface. And you probably have a vast model and want to see the reference. So first of all, I have a small dialog where I can choose the correct reference from. And with this reference, then I can just set it. This is also quite handy because I have a limited choice here, with sensible choices. And I set it back to the get event counter interface. That's what it was set to initially. And I can also go to the reference. And this is now the interesting part with the menu item to go to the reference. I can directly jump in the tree to the correct element, so which this is referring to. And so I have now, this is selected in the tree, so the reference that I have invoked here. You can also, with the tab referenced by, you will see all references to this element. So if there are other elements that are referring to this element, you can look it up here, and you can also travel to this reference then. So you make a double click on it, and then the correct reference is already selected here. And this is obviously also very handy to travel between references because it gives you a good overview on what is happening there. So I would like to skip the rest of this because it's only some smaller examples now, and go to the takeaways for the tree editor. So the tree editor supports you to, no, not the tree editor. The properties view supports you to work with the model and the tree editors. You can inspect the elements selected in the tree editor. And you can set the properties of the selected element. and also jump between the references. And jumping between references is the most interesting part to really know the structure well of your adaptive AUTOSAR model. And this comes in really handy when you have to jump between your references and sort out who is referencing and who is implementing interfaces and so on. So, but what if you have a lot of tabular data that you want to enter? Doing it by hand is really cumbersome and not efficient. And that's what the table editor is for. So the table editor allows you to work in a more spreadsheet-like manner with the model. It looks more complex, and it is more complex, to be honest, but it gives you really an efficient way to work with the model if you have to enter a lot of data and you know exactly what to do. So you should use it when you want to edit a specific area of the model and you want to enter a lot of data into the model. And this is now a little bit more complex than having only a tree. So you have also a breadcrumb where you can select the root of your model. Each tab is now the content of a direct child of the element that is selected, but grouped by the type. I will show this in an example where it gets really obvious what this means. And the representation of the model is now a tree table. So it's not only the tree, but also the properties that you want to set on the elements are here, and you can set them directly within this tree table. So for each element, basically, you see a table and not only the line with the short name that was there. You can directly enter the data here and jump into the next field, like you would do in an Excel spreadsheet, for example. And with the preferences dialog, you can then influence a lot of options how the table should look like. So you can customize the view on the table. You can set things read only. You can make things invisible that are not relevant for your use case. This is really powerful if you take the time to define it for your project. This can be a really efficient way to enter data. So let's look how this turns out in real life. So still working with the adaptive demo. The right-click menu gives you the option to open the tree editor or the table editor. And the table editor is working on a file, but you can also jump to it via the root. So let's open it, and then you have select the resource where you want to work on. So this is necessary because since we are editing the data, the mental model is easier to grasp if you work on a file. This is the intention behind it. So if we go to default ARXML, we see the breadcrumb again. And I move the table editor a little bit up so that we have a little bit more detail here and a bigger representation. So let's set the breadcrumb to a specific item. And here I selected the AUTOSAR package. And you see here the ADAM, it was a child of the AUTOSAR package. And there's two ports. The two ports are of the same type. So they are lines within this tree table. And this is only child, the ADAM is the only child of the type Adaptive Application Software Component type. So let's open the tree editor to compare what you see here. So the ADAM is what you see here, but the siblings of ADAM are different element types, so they are different tabs, different worksheets if you want to look at it like this. And if you now put it here, you have two components. Those components are direct children of the composition software component type, and you see them here as lines with the type components. So it's a little bit harder to understand the representation. I think with the tree editor as comparison, you can have a good you can get a good grasp on how it should work. And now let's see where this is really powerful. So you see this Khan config set with really a lot of elements below it. And you see here that the type of the element is always Khan hardware object. And this is a really good use case for the tree editor, for the table editor here. So let's open it and move it also to a prominent position. Let's set the root to the myCon element. And now you see two worksheets, the Khan general and the Khan config set. The Khan config set is what we are interested in, and there are 66 children on this Khan config set. So if we now set the breadcrumb to the Khan config set and go to the correct worksheet, the worksheet is the Khan hardware object where all the children are of this type. And then you can see the spreadsheet-like behavior here. And if you imagine, you would have to select each one manually and then edit it in the properties view. It's really hard to work efficiently with this. So you can edit it directly here in this table. You see all also quite nicely lined up. And this gives you an easy way to edit it. So you can set the Khan object ID, you can set different types. It's also aware of the type of element you want to, or type of property you want to change. So if it's a text, you have a text field. So let's say _new name. And it will also update in the model editor and in the tree editor. You can also set Boolean values just like before. I do not want to go into too much detail on that, but to skip a little bit forward. So what you see here, you can move around with the cursors also like in a normal spreadsheet way. What I would like to show you also is how to adapt the behavior here. How to adapt how the table looks. So let's move a little bit forward. Yeah, right. So let's go here. So I have now the table here open, and I right-click on the table and can go to Preference. And here you see table preferences. And in this dialog, you can really edit the way the table is shown and presented to you. So you can make columns visible or invisible, read only. You can set the whys and also make sure that the sorting is how you would like it to be. And this is something I really wanted to show you also. So let's not go into too much detail on this now and go to one step further with the takeaways, because I want to go into validation also. So it's a different representation of the model contents with the table editor. As you saw in the tree editor is more visually, but the table editor is much more efficient to edit data, especially if you have a lot of similar data there. And that makes it really, really good to edit tabular data. So maybe you get from your OEM an Excel file that you would have to transfer. So you could also write a script for that, but you would have a similar experience in looking at this data then in your model. So, so much for the table editor. And what's also very important for AUTOSAR projects is validation, because you want to make sure that the things you do are the right things and that you don't mess up by introducing errors. And you can look at validation in kind of two ways. So you can check for the schema correctness, so for the official AUTOSAR model consistency and syntactic errors in the XML. But what is also very interesting for projects, and I would like to see this more utilized in projects also, is semantic validation. Because you can ensure that your additional constraints on your projects are met. And this makes it necessary that you analyze your model. So you have to write some code that analyzes your model and inspects it and says, is this correct or not? So the first thing is how to trigger validation. It's also with a right-click menu, easy to come to. You will get a summary of the result of the validation, and you will see the validation errors and warnings immediately in the validation view and the problems view. I recommend to use the validation view because the validation view gives you a few more options and possibilities. So you can also define quick fixes, for example. And you can jump to the element with a double click, but I will show that in an example. You will also see error markers that appear in the editors and your project explorer, so that you get also a visual representation on what the result of the validation was, and to see where your errors or your warnings are, to refine on them and to fix them. You can trigger it also with ARN scripts or from command line. There's a command line interface also to the validation where you get the result, and you can even make a report that is an Excel or an XML file. So you have some options also there. The report generation to XML, for example, can also be then adapted with a style sheet, and you get an HTML report. So how to implement a custom validation? This is not that hard. You can create custom validations. You just have to extend a specific class, and this class can then inspect the elements with Java code. So you have the full possibilities of Java available to inspect your model. You have to tell it which elements are applicable to this rule. So which type of element can be inspected by this rule. And then you just return a result for your validation based on how you analyze the model. So you basically say if it's in the status okay, if it's a warning, or if it's an error. And the errors and the warnings, they will just appear like the built-in validations. So it's not that they will have some messy interface. No, they will be integrated fully into the Corpus Studio user interface already without having to do anything additional, but only to extend the specific class. You can even implement quick fixes. So if you see that your projects always do the same mistake and you want to prepare a quick fix for that, then it helps you already, your users, to solve the error. We will also look at this in a short example. And the quick fix is in the validation view, easily available via right click. So let's not waste time in looking at that. So let's have a look at an example. The first part here is only an example for the syntactic validation. So I mess up this file and then you will see an error marker, but I'm more interested in showing you the custom validation. So where you implement a class to validate your model based on the inspection. And I have here, let me shortly pause. I have here a custom validation demo. This is also delivered with Corpus Studio. So it's an example project that you could look into. And in this project, I have prepared some validation rule that is custom implemented. So let's have a look at the model with the tree editor. So I will expand all, and you see there some adaptive application software component types. And the rule here is basically if there is the word error in the short name, then it should generate an error during the validation. If it has OK in the short name, everything is OK here. And if it doesn't contain the word OK, then it should put a warning so that you see the different use cases. So as I said, you would have to implement or extend a specific class. And this is done in Java code here, the software component validation rule. So you see it extends the abstract validation rule, and it's parameterized with an adaptive application software component type. So this says this validation can be run for adaptive application software component types. So this is also when you look at the get applicability type, you will see also that it returns the get adaptive application software component type. This is how to tell Corpus Studio for which elements you can apply this validation rule. The validation rule also has an ID. So you can give it an ID, and you have to give it an ID to identify it during the validation, so that you also know which validator has put up the warning or error. And let's have a look at the specific implementation here. So the implementation is within this method doValidate. So you have to implement this method. It returns the iStatus, which shows if it was an error or not. And if the element has the short name, if the element contains error in the short name, then we want to raise an error during the validation. And this error then will show up in the user interface also. If the short name does not contain OK, then will trigger a warning by the validation. So it will show up as a warning in the validation view, and with a specific message also. And if none of these rules apply, then we return OK and tell the validation that everything is fine. So now we can trigger this validation rule. I will trigger it. I could trigger a full merged AUTOSAR validation, but I will trigger now on the specific file, the file-based validation. And now you see the summary of the validation, one error and one warning. And this is exactly what we have defined in our rules. So if I now look up the details of the validation, you see the messages that were done, and you see which rule has triggered this validation, error or warning, and you see this actually applies to what we have implemented there. So adding validation here is really a help, and it shows up also integrated into the user interface of Corvus Studio. And you see here the error and the warning already. It shows also which element has triggered this warning or this error, and you can even jump to that element. So if you have a custom validation rule and something has triggered this validation rule, you can right-click and select Go To, and you will see in the tree where the validation has failed or where the error was given there. And you will also see the problem marker here and the warning marker. So you see also that you can jump to the warning. And looking at the project explorer, you even see the error marker here at the config ARXML. So the error marker does always show the most severe item here. And even at the project, you see this. You can clean up the problem markers to make sure, let's say you want to make a rerun and want to make sure that you start with a fresh state. Now we have cleaned up the problem markers here. And if we rerun the validation, we will get the markers again. And now in this validation view, we can even look at quick fixes. Quick fix is a way to get rid of an error, but with some support from the user interface. For this, we also have to implement a certain class. So in this case, abstract quick fix, and implement the fix method for this class. And here in the fix method, I only set the short name to the short name and OK underscore fixed underscore by 1 to see that we applied the quick fix 1 here. We have to say for which validation rule the quick fix is applicable. So in this case, only to the my software component validation rule that we customly defined before. And yeah, so this is how you implement a quick fix here. So you get the element for which you want to apply the quick fix, and you can change it to the correct one here. So, and how to apply the quick fix. I will also show how to apply the quick fix. Just a second. So I have defined a second quick fix. It's kind of the same implementation. It changes the short name to a state that does not show an error in the short name. So the rule defined an error is thrown when error is contained in the short name. And now I would like to apply the quick fix here. So I select the problem, select the quick fix I want to apply. Here I have two quick fixes that would be possible, since I have two quick fixes defined for this validation rule. and I want to apply this quick fix, and you see it has fixed it, and with the quick fix that we have implemented here. And thinking on to enforce or to foster a consistent behavior or consistent schemes within your project, this can be really handy for defining that you keep everything in order how you want it to be. So let's apply also the quick fix for the warning, and now everything is fixed and we are fine again. So as for the validation, you can validate additional constraints. You can define it in Java code, which gives you all the possibility to inspect and adapt it and adapt the model. You can even provide some quick fixes. You have a lot of flexibility with this. So it's really allowing the team to work efficiently if you use it in a good way. And it can also be integrated in a CI/CD build chain. So you have a command line script then that you can use to trigger a validation on the project. Thank you.